Hello, and welcome to this edition of the Clarendon Chronicles podcast. My guest today is Jess Harvey. Jess is a transformation coach with a unique and inspirational journey. Having transitioned from a successful career in corporate banking, she has embarked on a path of self-discovery and professional growth, focusing upon empowering individuals at pivotal points in their careers. As well as coaching, my guest has a passion for mentoring and supporting corporates to establish impactful mentoring programs, facilitating bespoke coaching groups, and providing traditional executive coaching as well. Her personal journey of confronting and conquering significant life changes forms the bedrock of her coaching philosophy, focusing on empowering clients to fortify their core, trust their instincts, and make decisive, confident choices. Jess has joined my podcast today to explore with me the crucial role of values in the coaching journey, acting as a compass to guide us towards success and authenticity. We are hoping to discuss her beliefs in a more profound, personalised approach to instigate genuine change, cultivating a resilient foundation that fosters personal growth and empowers clients to take purposeful action on their terms. As Jess uncovers the powers of values with us in shaping a successful career and how aligning actions with these values creates a strong foundation, we're hoping in this episode of my podcast that we can discuss how values influence our decisions and help us stay true to ourselves. Jess, welcome to my podcast. Thanks for your time today. I know it's pretty busy in terms of professional and a personal schedule, but welcome along. Great to be able to discuss coaching philosophies with you.
Thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much for having me, Jeremy. I'm very, very flattered. And that was a lovely welcome. So thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, let's get straight to it. Jess, you and I have got to know each other through our shared passion for coaching. But unlike perhaps other people, we both entered the coaching world after established careers in other sectors. So to give us some background, can you give the listeners and the audience a view of, let's call it Jess Mark 1, perhaps talking us through some early influences and into your first career?
Definitely. So Jess Mark 1, if you'd asked Jess Mark 1 when she was 5 years old what she's going to be a ballerina. And she trained for White Lodge and was going to do dance. So very different from the world that I ended up doing and the world that I'm in now. So very traditional upbringing. Went to school 3 to 18, all girls schools, was head girl, very much sort of making sure I followed all the rules and did all the things that you're supposed to do. Did a gap year where I sold televisions and radios, and my claim to fame was I sold a set of televisions to the Spice Girls, which was a great acclaim in 1997. And then I went to university, and I initially was doing philosophy, but I decided that I knew that I existed and tables existed. So actually I wanted to do something different. And I was at Durham and I decided I wanted to do economics, and I didn't have the grades, but I managed to somehow talk myself into the course 4 weeks after it started, and then ended up doing financial and business economics, I think was my final degree, because I changed my modules so much. Yeah, it was all sorts of bits of changing, but I definitely would say that growing up, you would probably class me as that traditional person. But interestingly, the desire to be a dancer probably carried on all the way through in terms of always wanting to do things really well and work really, really hard. And that's always been part of my foundation.
It's interesting because a couple of other people I've spoken to quite recently have said exactly that, actually, in that it's about mindset, and doesn't matter what you're doing, whether it be dance or university studies or an apprenticeship, as long as you've got the mindset right, then everything else is available to attack, as it were, going forward. I did something of a similar approach. I just did to a certain extent the things that were in front of me. So do traditional subjects at A level, that a traditional subject at university, and then began to think about what I really wanted to do after university, which was then actually something completely different from what I was actually doing at university. But you entered a career and went into the corporate banking sector. So what was that like, and what or did you go into there differently? Was there an intermediate step? How did you get into your role in banking? Where did that come from?
So I started off being an accountant. I got a placement. I did the milk round, which doesn't exist, I think, anymore, but with KPMG. So I did work experience with them and I got my role. I was due to do my role in Newcastle, but I broke up with my boyfriend, so I convinced them to move my role to London, which they did. There was a lot of convincing that went on in my early part of my career. And then I failed my exams, so I was no longer an accountant. And although they'd offered me a role, I could redo the year, I could go and work at another accounting firm, I realised it's not what I wanted. So I moved into banking and finance. And I actually started off, before I got into the corporate banking world, I was in investment banking. But before that, I worked for a broker house, very old-fashioned traditional trading house. My first job was to listen to the tapes from 9/11, because 9/11 happened 10 days before. And it was to work out who put stop loss orders in and whether or not we owed client money or the client owed us money. And again, I had to learn pretty quickly. I was the only woman on the trading floor. So back in 2001, that was a very different environment to now. And I had to do a lot of talking and a lot of working things out. And it's how I met my husband. And yeah, that's kind of how I started. And after a year or so there, realised that probably I wanted to do something a bit different. So I went to work for UBS and worked for them for a couple of years and then moved to JP Morgan, where I headed up their control room and then did a number of roles before eventually ending up at HSBC, where I was a managing director. So the career has been traditional in terms of a number of ways where I've worked my way up the ladder, but each way I've done something different and a little bit more entrepreneurial. So I've set new teams up, I've created new things, and I've always kind of done something slightly different than what you're supposed to do.
I think it's really interesting that you said doing something different, because I did the same in my executive career, in that what can potentially sometimes seen as moving from sector to a different sector to a different role, I actually did that deliberately. I wanted to do something else, and I took the same view into recruiting as well, in that I was always more interested in somebody coming to work with me who wanted to do something differently. So on occasions you get that wrong, but I always erred on the side of, if somebody wants to do something different, they were probably going to work with me quite well. And if I could go into the corporate banking sector, I mean, you touched on it there. What was the corporate banking sector like for a woman in the early 2000s then? Is it just in general terms, was it very different? How I'll let you answer.
I can't probably tell you all the stories because they are highly inappropriate. And when I look back, it was terrifying. I kind of had to learn. So when I started at this trading house, I had to really learn how to stand up for myself. And in a lot of ways, it gave me a really hard edge, which I wouldn't say is a good thing in any way, shape, or form. And I had to end up sort of blending in and trying to sort of be part of the crew. And that wasn't great because I was in compliance. I didn't mention before, I ended up being European head of compliance interim role at HSBC, and then was a chief control officer. So my role was very much having to step back. But when you're on your own in this environment, you end up trying to blend in, which is really hard to create an identity and really hard to be the woman that you want to be. And especially in your early 20s, you haven't got a clue what you are. There were no role models for me, apart from the head of HR, and that was a whole other story. So that was very difficult. And then when I moved to UBS, it was a lot better because I had some phenomenal women around me who were strong and they were powerful and they knew what they wanted, but they were tough, like really tough, because they had to be, because they worked on the transactions. We worked with the bankers, we worked with the dealers. We were doing big corporate transactions that were hard, and we were having to say yes or no. And then when I moved to JP Morgan, again, it was the same, and it was really, really difficult. I'd still say it's the one bank I'd go back to, but again, I had to be really difficult because I was the one person in the region that could say if someone could do a transaction or not, bearing in mind what information we had in the bank. And it's like 3 o'clock in the morning and you've got some guy on the phone going, "We've got to do this," you kind of felt you had to push back. And it's always been really counterintuitive to me. And later on, the feedback I got was I was too feminine, I was too soft, I wouldn't necessarily make it. I wasn't seen as being serious enough, which I found really difficult and really struggled with, and it was difficult to find a role model. And interestingly, despite what I do and what I believe in, I only ever had one female mentor in my entire career in banking. The rest of them were all men, because I couldn't see anyone that I aspired to be. I had some great managers, but they couldn't mentor me, and I couldn't see where I wanted to be or what I wanted to be. So it was a very interesting journey. I had lots of mentees, and it made me realize that I was kind of, the women before me had to be in a certain way so that I could be in a certain way, so that people behind me could be in a certain way. And we were kind of making that way through. And I mean, it was still a lot of fun, I have to say that. There was some great times and some really hard working times, but yeah, it was a very interesting time when I look back on it.
And if I could pick up something then, and we'll come on to your current coaching in a short while, but did you have things like a coach or a mentor at that stage? I mean, you said you might have had role models, but did you actually have a coach or a mentor in those organizations?
So I had my first mentor was at JP Morgan, and she was called Alison Livesey, and she was phenomenal. And interestingly enough, I had to put something out. Well, I didn't have to. I put something out on LinkedIn recently asking for some feedback for a program that I'm writing. She was the first person that responded. And we chatted. And she said, I've been told to sit with you because you've got to learn to have more gravitas. She said, but I know you've got gravitas. You just need to work out how you show them without telling them where to go. I was like, okay. And she was fabulous. And she still is fabulous. And she's a brilliant woman. And then after that, I was told to find mentors. There weren't really official programs. So I ended up, I always went to sort my own out. So my last mentor I had at HSBC, who's actually my sponsor, was Nuno Matias, who was the global head of wealth and private bank and retail banking for HSBC. And I'd had John Hinshaw before, so I'd always gone and sought them out myself. But in terms of a coach, I did when I got made managing director, because in organizational terms, that's when you get a coach. That's when they provided me with a coach. But I had done work on myself before, and I'd done my own, I'd privately paid for coaching before that point. But when I hit the MD level, they said, right, you should have a coach. And that's when I met with Bettina, who was phenomenal and just brilliant, really straightforward, down to earth, and actually really challenged my thinking, which I really liked because there was no agenda to it. And I'd got to a point at that point in my career where there was so much politics going on that anytime someone challenged you, you automatically thought there was an agenda to it. Whereas opposed, she was just like, how are we going to make you the best that you can be? And it was just brilliant. And it really made me look. And she was the one that really got me to think about, who am I? What do I stand for? And once you know that, it makes you a very different person. And it makes it a lot easier when you are trying to go into situations where it's not positive for anybody, but you know you just want to get to the right outcome, and it's not personal because you know who you are. And that was transformational for me.
I think what you said there, really interesting for anybody who's a coach or anybody thinking of getting a coach. It isn't to be told what to do. It isn't to have people make your mind up for you. It's to allow you to grow, perhaps coaching on the side of a series of interactions, series of discussions, maybe certain suite of issues to deal with, mentoring about growing as a person. But as a relatively young industry, I just think that for anybody considering it, I really still, even now, and I would say this anyway, as a coach and a mentor, I just can't see any downside at all. And in the scheme of things, it's a very small cost to either an individual or an organization with just so much output and so much of an outcome that's available. I'll pick you up on one thing you said earlier, Jess. You talked about convincing. So I'd perhaps call it, maybe from a coach word, influencing, because leaders now seem very much as an influencer. How did you influence your stakeholders? How did you go, because you touched on it there, how did you influence stakeholders in or outside of your organization in a role which had got lots of visibility then at that point?
So by that point, you're right, and it went from convincing to influencing. And I always say, someone say to me, what makes a great compliance officer? And I said, well, a great compliance officer, a controls person, is with you every step of the way. You're never coming to them at the end because they're part of the journey because you want them to be part of the journey. And that was very much my style. I influenced by being there, by partnering. And actually, a lot of the skills I use there, I use as a coach. I regularly say to my clients, and I used to actually say to the CEO of a region, was, I'm not your mother. That's not my role. And it's a case of I was there to partner and to be in my role in the bank, I was the grumpy old woman who'd say, have we thought about this? Why should we do that? What do we need to think about? What's the impact? And actually, very similar to coaching questions. Have you thought about this? How does it make you feel? What do you want the outcome to be? And so a lot of my influencing style, I think now, when I look back, talking to you now, I realize there's a lot around partnership. And I rarely shouted. I only shouted twice on the floor at HSBC. And my boss at the time, she was the head of compliance, was like, oh my Lord, that's terrifying. Because I just had enough. I was like, I'm absolutely done today. And everyone's like, crikey. And I was kind of always known as being firm but fair, and she never gets cross. She's always very relaxed. And so I began to have a reputation, which was one of, I did what I said I was going to do. Now, other people didn't like that, so I was being political. But that now I realized that was on them, that wasn't on me. When actually in reality was, I worked really hard. I had a team that I like to think loved working for me, because they all seemed very sad when I left. And I treated everyone how I wanted to be treated as well. And it didn't matter if you were the CEO for Europe or you were the grad, everyone got treated in exactly the same way. Everyone on reception I knew everybody. And I made sure I had great connections. I was able to talk to people. And I was like, what can we do as opposed to what can't we do? And also, I think, because I always used to say to everyone, we're not saving lives, we're just moving money around kind of safely-ish, hopefully. Let's get some perspective, and took the ego out of it. It became a lot better and a lot easier. So I think basically I'd say my influencing style was through partnership.
I think some really good advice there for listeners as well, in that, and you mentioned there that the technical side, I think certainly from my perspective, let's say the higher up the ladder you potentially went, the less the technical skills mattered. Actually, certainly in my world, it was, yeah, thanks, we understand what you've done before, but it's about either running your business or running a team, being part of a leadership team, being a strategic advisor to whoever your CEO or MD is, and that becomes just so much more important. And that's really what got me into be thinking about being a coach as well. So in the introduction, Jess, we talked about a few pivotal moments and some life-changing events then that shaped your coaching philosophy. Are you able to share with us what they are?
Yeah. No, definitely. So it was interesting. One of the reasons I chose to leave banking was because, twofold really. It got to a point that things were happening within the organisation I didn't like. And I suddenly caught myself being someone that I didn't want to be. And I'd lost sight of who I was and got so caught up in some really not great things that I was almost embarrassed. And it's taken me a long time to kind of move forward from it. And it was like I was watching somebody else. And for me, from a coaching perspective, it's made me really hone in on this. But who are you? What are you really? And are your behaviors saying that? I was talking to a client the other week, and I said, she was like, I want to work this out. And I was like, okay, what do you want people to say when you're not in the room? What is it? And therefore we work from that backwards. And if you want that, how are you going to get there? And I looked at it and I was like, this isn't who I want to be. And I was traveling a lot, and it was all great, and in business class at Hong Kong airport and stuff. And that was just, it was life. But I wasn't the person that I wanted to be. And I craved being at home, and I found that I was getting more and more distant from where I wanted to be long term. And then my husband got really, really ill. And I think there's nothing worse than seeing the person that you love more than anything attached to drips and everything else, and being in the hospital for 12 days, that makes you go, well, what really does actually matter? Is it having a nice blow dry on a Monday morning and carrying a gorgeous handbag? Or is it actually spending time, doing things, adding value? And it really made me to go, right, what do I really want to do? And I'd wanted to do mentoring, and I'd wanted to have the business, and then training to be a coach. I was like, I really enjoy the coaching as well. So why would I not do that? And for me, that's what kicked off the journey. But when I look back, there were points of interaction with people and things that happened that made me think, this isn't the way I want to be. This isn't the right way. But why are people then looking at it? And actually, since this 18 months since I've been out, I look back now a lot more. I'm like, well, why were they behaving like that? Oh, it's because of this. It's because of that. And it also stops you thinking about you as well, because it's not all about us. Quite often it's about that much of us, and the rest of it's about somebody else.
I mean, maybe it's an age thing, but when I was thinking about doing something differently, you do try and perhaps kind of look into take off your what I called a corporate straitjacket, which was actually you can surround yourself with your corporate straitjacket. So that's what people see. So they see whatever role you're in and the way you behave in that role. But one of the first things that we did on actually both of my qualifications in coaching was to we were encouraged to say just ignore that for a while, because you're in the business now of creating your own new coaching style. For me, there were one or two seismic events going on, one of the traditional learning and development strategy away days. That was one. I won't go into the detail, but I was literally doing things that I had done 30 years ago when I first started coming out of university. And we did the same thing, literally the same exercise. And I just thought, that's it. That I'm not doing this again. I'm going to do it properly. And took some actions to be able to do that. So do you think that prepared you to enter the coaching and mentor? You'd seen the difference, you'd seen how you could be, and so did it actually prepare you in a sense to be able to do that?
Yes, it did. It prepared me in a lot of ways, but what it didn't prepare me for was I didn't realize what a small world I was part of, and what an incredibly privileged world that is as well. And actually, there's a whole world out there that isn't banking and isn't in Canary Wharf or in the city or whatever. But it prepared me in terms of being able to have conversations and to speak and to think a little bit on the hoof, to be honest, because when you're coaching, you'll prepare, you have everything ready, and then your client will say something completely different. You're like, whoa, where's that come from?
Yeah, because it's their agenda, but it's absolutely their agenda, isn't it? Yeah.
It's 100%. They may have said at the end of the last session, it'd be really good if we could do this next time. You're like, brilliant, I've got a lovely idea. I know a great tool we could use, brilliant. And then they're like, actually, this is what I want to talk about. You're like, oh, put that to one side. This is about you. And what it really did prepare me for was that piece around it being about them, because I'd spent so much time focusing and being concerned about people focusing on me. I was able to take it back. And I always use the analogy when I coach that in my mind, when I'm coaching someone, they sit in the middle of the chair and there's a circle around them, and that's their coaching circle, and I'm on the outside. And if I feel that I'm wanting to lean into either where you change your relationship to becoming like savior or mentor or something like that, I pull myself back, and that's how I'm able to sort of manage it. And so that really did prepare me. I think where I wasn't so prepared was that not everybody speaks in corporate. It's weird, isn't it? No, not everyone uses all those weird, silly words. But I got around that by doing some amazing coaching with a couple of unions, where I coached like someone from BT, the sound engineer from Bridgerton, and a software developer from Sellafield, all in one day. Yeah. So I got completely different experiences.
Yeah, similar to mine. One of the best things that I found when going through a qualification, and we all know it's quite easy for people to become a coach and mentor and just change their banner on LinkedIn. Lots of reasons why. If anybody's thinking about getting a coach, to delve really deeply into whether they've got a qualification, whether they've done their appropriate research, how they subscribe to a code of ethics, for example. But lots of reasons for wanting to do that. At what point do you then decide, Jess, I'm going to be a coach? When was the seismic event for you that you said, right, I'm going to be a coach? Because I said I enjoyed the qualification so much. I did a second qualification. The cohort for me, you mentioned before then that you had lots of different experiences with people. I had the same. It was people I was working with somebody from the probation service, somebody from the revenue, somebody ran the maternity, actually more than the maternity wing. It was a whole of a region's maternity response in actual fact, through COVID as well. So I really enjoyed that. But at what point did you think, right, that's it, I'm ready to be a coach?
So it's interesting. The reason I did my qualification wasn't to be a coach. I actually did it because long term, there's business that I'm setting up, which is about mentoring and bringing women together to mentor one another. And as we said, I go in and work with companies to do their mentoring. And but like you can put your name coach on without having any qualification, and that's just not me. I think it goes back to following the rules, being head girl at school, training to do dance, do all those things. I was like, no, I have to have a qualification. So I did my ILM diploma because it had coaching and mentoring. And so went along to do it. Basically, on the mentoring side, I was like, I'm not about mentoring. When I first looked at it, I was like, we'll go with it. And I loved it. I did my hours and I absolutely loved it. And then I was like, well, actually, to do the mentoring business, it's going to be quite complicated, because I suddenly realised everything I wanted to do, there was quite a lot involved in it. So I'll just do a bit of coaching until we'll see how that goes. And then one day I was like, oh, I'm a coach. That's actually what I do now. That's how I earn money. I am actually a coach, and I'm doing it. I'm really enjoying it. And by that point, we'd moved down to Surrey from sort of the suburbs of London. Well, not really even the suburbs of Rhodesia. And we sort of moved out to the countryside, and we'd had the house redone. And whilst it was all going on, I'd sat at the kitchen table and I'd launched a group coaching program to 12 women, and I was running that. And I was like, oh, I've actually done all of these things. And I saw a great graphic on LinkedIn at the weekend that Stephen Bartlett showed, which was, you're looking at the pile of little things that you haven't done, but then you're not seeing the massive thing behind. And I literally did that. I was like, oh, wow, I've actually, sorry for listeners, they wouldn't realize I just turned around and looked behind myself, because I forget that you can't see everything. I've achieved all those things, and I'm a coach, and I couldn't believe people were actually like paying me money, and I was really enjoying it. Because also, I don't know if you found the same, certainly by the end of my banking career, whilst I loved a lot of things, it wasn't exactly like giving me joy, and this was giving me real joy. And when I saw those light bulb moments, I was like, wow, this is really cool. And people pay me. That's really weird. So I had a massive amount of self-doubt. And like the minute I realised it, imposter syndrome completely kicked in. Everything, I was like, well, I'm clearly not qualified to do this. How has this happened? How has anyone let me? And now I'm coming back out the other side of it now.
It's really interesting. You said you sort of reached that point, and I never quite got to the point, but I could see it coming quite quickly, in that because of what I'd done in an exec career, I was heading towards a point where I had increasing responsibility in an executive role, but decreasing levels of interest, which I actually thought was quite a dangerous combination. And I was quite fortunate in that I sort of picked it up myself and thought, this is heading in the wrong direction, and this is not fair on other people. And at the time, I'd begun, for example, coaching and mentoring a younger group of people in organizations, and I really enjoyed that. So I was enjoying the coaching and the mentoring and the sponsoring of younger people more than the actual day job, as it were. So so you've done that. How did you implement your plan? So you talked a little bit there about doing something almost a little bit by accident, but then once you thought, actually, no, it is real, I've got beyond my imposter syndrome, which in my coaching experience, virtually everyone talks about that in the first 2 sessions. How did you implement your plan? Because you talked a little bit about groups of women. What did you do to implement your plan, Jess?
So then I kind of realised that this is what I was doing, and it's actually part of the portfolio career. The whole idea was I'd have this, I would do some advisory work, and I'd also do some med work. So my plan was then, okay, right, well, I'm here, I might as well carry on. So I'd had my qualification. I then identified, and I spoke to my first coach at Bettina, and she said, every year you need to get yourself another qualification, or you need to develop and grow in some way. You need to think about what you're doing. And I did a lot of research. And so I just got I'm now a licensed NLP practitioner. So that's a whole area. And the reason why I wanted to do that was it's about language and the power of questions, and the power of great questions, and also how people respond. And that's great in 2 ways. One-to-one is brilliant, but in a group setting, it's really interesting because you can use it to really pinpoint people. So I had that side and that training side. And then I looked at, well, how do I develop my business? So my business side, I carried on with my one-to-one. I sit on a couple of companies' coaching panels, so that revenue, and I've just literally networked. And that for me was really difficult, because I was used to everyone wanting to know me because of my role. I never really network. For someone who's I can be quite gregarious, entertain a room, I can hold a room, I can talk, I can do all those things. I hate networking. It makes me want to cringe. I found it really difficult. It's a muscle I've had to really, really flex. And so I've done quite a lot of coaching on myself. And, talking to people, going out there, speaking, writing, and I just slowly building. And it takes time. And that's the other challenge. And I don't know if you found the same, Jeremy, that I went from being what you would define as very successful relatively easily in my mind, because you forget the 20 odd years that are behind you because you've just stepped your way through. And you think, well, I must be the same success. And I remember trying to do my first tech fix. I was like, I don't have my chief of staff. I don't have a grad that wants to do it for me. I have no executive assistant. Oh, it's just me. And at the time, and the dog who was like looking at me going, I can't do this for you. So it's been a step, and it's taking time, but it's about just continuing going out there and also doing things like getting to know my numbers and all of those things, which are super important, I've discovered. And actually not playing, actually really being in the game.
I think, again, that's really interesting. The reason I was smiling in particular is that as people who I've worked with as well in making the transition into being a full-time coach. You mentioned network as well. I think it's really, for people perhaps listening to this as well, it hasn't necessarily completely changed my thought process, but I think it's a really healthy skill to at least think about coaching and mentoring if you wanted to become a non-executive director as well, because you're in that point really being an influencer of the leaders, and you have to effectively be a coach and a mentor as well and be consistent with that. So I think some really interesting points. And same again, I think the idea that having had 20 odd years, in my case a bit longer, of being in responsible positions. Yeah, well, yes, I had a birthday last week and had a zero on the end of it as well. But to get the fact that the fact that it's now just you, that everything's down to you, and the idea that actually, do you know what, you aren't just going to be able to do something on LinkedIn and then have 1,000 people contact you around coaching, and it brings me on to kind of my next question. Actually, there's lots of coaches out there, still a relatively unregulated industry, which I think, again, for anybody listening, it is still quite unregulated. So finding your audience and having your philosophy enables the coachee and the mentee to get to the right coach and mentor as well. So what is your particular coaching philosophy, and who's your audience?
So I really fought against who my actual audience is now for a long time, because you start off by thinking, well, I have to appeal to everyone because someone out there, if I scattergun it across the world, someone somewhere's going to go, yep. But what you realize is you're not talking to anyone. And actually my sweet spot is women in finance, because that's what I was, and I completely get it. And I also, especially that executive director to managing director bit where you're going and the pressure and stuff, I'd say that's a real sweet spot. Now, when I work with corporates, I work with, I call two-legged clients, as in human beings, anyone. I will work with anyone and I can do that. But if you said to me, what is your real niche, I would say it would be that. And the challenge with that is, though, that clients will come to me because they want the same career that I had. So they'll be effectively, what they don't realize is they're asking for mentoring, not for coaching. And that's a really big difference. And so we have to do quite a lot to set the scene. And my chemistry session with them is quite in depth, so I can make sure they fully understand. A, they won't have the career that I have because life is totally different and we're not the same person.
Yeah.
But two, I can mentor you, but it's not really going to get you anywhere because it's not what you actually need. If you're coming and you want a coach, then that's what we will do. But for me to mentor you, it would be a very different journey. And I think it's really important for people to understand that and get comfortable. But also there are times when I coach, and I don't know if you do the same, I'll say, they're clearly wanting me to mentor them. So I say, I'm taking my coaching hat off, I'm putting my mentoring hat on for 2 minutes, and this is what we're talking about. And so I have that distinction. So I will step into the circle if needed, but I try as much as possible to stand outside of it to really help them grow. Because in reality, as you and I both know, to set a client up for success, we won't be around. It's them on their own.
The difference that you mentioned there between coaching and mentoring, and you know that I had one of the gurus of global coaching on my podcast recently, Professor David Clutterbuck, and I asked him So just in a few words, David, can you set out the difference? And it was really sharp and really punchy. And he just said, look, Jeremy, this is from 30, 40 years in the industry. Coaching, dealing with specific change, probably a series of discussions on one particular issue, and helping the person to make their own decisions based on the appropriate information. Mentoring really helps if you've walked to a certain extent in their shoes. So bringing something to the table, and that to a certain extent, one of the reasons you and I are having this conversation today is we have that similar background, which is I might not have the specific experience of absolutely everything, but crikey, in 25, 30 years, there's probably not that many situations that I can't think there's a parallel. And there's some outcomes from it, there's some learnings from it. And just having stepped in somebody's shoes for a little while, I just think it's really, really helpful for somebody having been in industry and sat round a table with different people, different teams, teams of teams, and understanding how organizations can be quite dysfunctional as well in any organization, no matter how well they're run. So, Jess, you
nothing
talked as
surprises
well.
me anymore.
Absolutely, no, yeah, absolutely. We mentioned that values were really important to you. So, shaping your coaching foundations, like putting down the foundations for a house. How are you using values in particular for your brand of coaching and mentoring?
So my values are pretty simple. Well, I think they're pretty simple. They're honesty, integrity, openness, empathy, to name some of them. And I always want my clients to feel that they're safe and that they're nurtured and that they're in a safe space to talk and explore whatever it is that they want to explore, which is why, having an experience like you, nothing really surprises me. And I'm able to let things kind of wash over me so we can go through the experience in the right way. And for me, those values, I feel, are super important because it means that I know who I am. So you talked about the foundation of a house. I often, when I'm explaining to my clients, I want them to think about it like a tree. So your roots are your values, and the wind may shake you and you may move, but unless it's a whopping great big hurricane, hopefully your roots will stay in the ground. And so for me, what it does is I try to live by them, and I try to, timeliness is actually a really important value for me as well. And, if I say I'm going to do something for a client, I will do it. And if I forget to, I am literally beating myself up. I probably need to think about perfection a bit. But anyway, that's another thing to work on at a later stage. But it's that when I think about them and I think about that piece, especially around the nurturing and the empathy, I remember what it was like to sit in a room terrified at work and trying to not cry. And I never want anyone to feel like that. And that's why I always want people to feel safe. And that's why I try and bring that. And I bring some humor to the table and we have a laugh. And I have one client, both her and I share a similar love for the Real Housewives franchise, which for some is not necessarily very highbrow, but there we go. But actually, we had that common ground, and she went through a really challenging time, and she's now got herself a great role, and she's actually now looking at something else as well. But she went through she was treated really badly at one point, and she found it really difficult. And I was able to, because we had this random connection of loving these things, use that empathy and that safety. And she's like, it's the first time I've ever been able to talk about this, which I think is a massive thing. And that to me is, if my client comes away feeling that they are safe and they've discovered one thing about themselves, or they've made one decision and they feel good about that, that to me is the most incredible feeling. And that's what matters.
Really well put, I think. And again, a coach and a mentor, again, for those people considering it who haven't been through it, I didn't have a coach and a mentor, by the way, and I would have really appreciated having one, because more through love. Again, one of the reasons I got into coaching and mentoring was things turned out okay in the majority of cases with me in an exec career, and I just wonder how they might not have turned out in quite as good a way. And I wanted to be in the position of saying, these are some of the things, these are the things you can help with. And therefore, again, in thinking about my audience in particular, you start out as a coach, think, well, I can coach anybody. And then you narrow it down and think, actually, no, these are my particular ones. And my particular brand is aspirational C-suite, aspirational directors, people who've got that next level to go to, probably in a growth company, probably got a growth mindset. And then you work on it and work on it and work on it. And then it becomes so much more valuable to the coachee and the mentee, because you get that connection, as you said, Jess, that connection and that rapport is such a huge percentage of making it work. So thanks for sharing that, Jess. And so, Jess, what's next for you? So you've talked us through your philosophy, your values, and what's next for you, and how does the audience connect with you to find out more?
So what's next for me? So we are on this coming out at the beginning of December. So I'm going to be doing some masterclasses probably beginning of next year. I've got a lovely program called Career Accelerator, which is online, and then people are able to come together in a community. I'm actually launching the Female Mentoring Alliance mentoring piece as well in 2025, which is super exciting, and hoping to build on my network. I have got some qualifications there, which I learned through Jeremy, which is very exciting. And I am, taking it one step at a time, working with a couple of companies as well on culture and values, because myself and a gentleman that I know very much believe in the culture and values piece. So once you have your values of yourself and then you have the values of the company, it can be a really powerful combination. And you can get some really good culture being delivered, because the regulators in banking have been talking about it for a long time, and now they've brought out papers on it. So actually, we need to tackle the elephant in the room, and coaching is a great way to do that. So lots going on in 2025. If people want to find out more, they can go onto LinkedIn. Probably the best way. If they like the gram, I'm on at the Female Mentoring Alliance, and that's all inspirational and ideas and tips. A lot of it's on LinkedIn as well. So there is many a way to find out.
So we'll find you on LinkedIn. What's your website, Jess?
So the best one is probably www.jessharveylimited. And then for the mentoring side, it's thefemalementoringalliance.com.
Look forward to that coming in 2025, Jess. Jess,
thank
you so much for your time today, sharing a few personal issues and challenges that you've overcome in and around your exec career going into coaching and mentoring. Particularly wanted to talk to you because we shared this journey of having all of that exec experience and then going into that coaching and mentoring and being able to overcome people who've been coaches and mentors for 20, 25 years or so. And I think you and I have a view that I certainly do, that actually I think there's a real slot for coaches and mentors who can combine that and are not just pure practitioners or pure academics, and then have a coaching qualification and a philosophy as well. So really fascinating to hear what you've told us today. I'm sure the audience will have found that inspirational as well. So thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for being my guest on the Clarendon Chronicles podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Jess, thank you again. Wonderful to speak to you, and bye for now.